Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. I'm Chris Hansen tonight in New York City. We have so much to get to tonight. I'm going to start with some breaking news. Some of you may have heard because I put it out on social media, Twitter, etc. today, that I have fired my web producer, Vincent Nicotra. He had been saying and doing things that had become a sideshow to this very important investigation into Onision. And there was a lot of talk about a laptop. Let me address that right off the top here. So one of the victims, Sarah, had a laptop and a cell phone. And we were told that they may have pictures and some text back and forth that were relevant to the investigation. Sarah had a relationship with Onision and Kai. There are allegations that this was illegal and involved grooming and enticement. When we became aware that there might be material on the computer and the laptop, we shut it down. I contacted the FBI. The discussion went from the Michigan office to the Seattle, Washington office, and then we were told that somebody from the New York office, field office, would contact us. That didn't happen before the holidays. We've reached out again. In the course of all this, Vincent apparently said that the FBI already had the laptop, which is not true. So it became confusing and it became a big issue on social media as to what Vincent was talking about. What I want to make crystal clear tonight was that while Vincent Nicotra did involve himself, and I did have him involved in this YouTube channel and a website as a web producer, he had no involvement in the investigative process here. No contact with the FBI, no sources that brought in information so critical to this case. He did deal with some of the victims, in some cases effectively. But we'll get into this later with Stevie, Wolfe, YouTube streamer, and we'll talk about it in more detail. But we also have breaking news involving the actual investigation itself. And as you know, Attorney Mike Morse and I went out to Washington State a week before last to try to interview Onision. James Jackson, he goes by now. Gregory Jackson, he's also known by. And we knocked on his door. Mike is with us right now from the Detroit area in Michigan, and we're going to talk about some of the latest things in the investigation. Mike, thanks for being with us tonight.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let me, we talked about this before the show, but I have now confirmed, and you know this as well because you've looked at the police records, that in 2019 alone, there were 19 police calls to the home of Greg and Kai in Gig Harbor, Washington, ranging from complaints from citizens around the country about young women being exploited on Greg's YouTube show to potential neglect of children. 19 different police runs. And now we find out, and I've confirmed on the record from the Pierce County Sheriff's Department, that there are, quote, multiple criminal investigations into activity at that home involving James Jackson, Greg Jackson, his wife Kai, ranging from sexual exploitation online to child neglect. Now, you put that on top of what came out of our visit, our door knock, week before last, which was a police report about one of the couple's children, a 2-year-old girl, falling from a second-story window, landing in the driveway, suffering skull fractures, a hematoma, had to be rushed to the hospital, and some very questionable circumstances surrounding this entire event. Now, to make it clear, nobody wants to see a child hurt. Not me, not you. You've spent your life in the law, defending children, defending people who are victims. I've done the same on television. What strikes you most, Mike, about this police report involving this child's fall from the second-story window?
Well, I've been doing this a long time, almost 30 years, reading police reports and in my daily work, with auto accidents. And you go through people's backgrounds, and you get these type of records all the time. I can't remember ever in almost 30 years finding a case where 19 separate trips by the police to a home has ever occurred. So that number shocks me. There's definitely lots of mentions of CPS, Child Protective Services, in the records. And the police run sheet from the fall out the window is sad. I mean, as a dad of 3 daughters, allowing, this child was obviously unsupervised, climbed up on a bed frame or something, pushed her way out the window, or him out the window. I'm not quite sure. They blacked out the names, which is fine.
Right.
And landing on the cement and having really catastrophic injuries. I don't know how the child is doing now. I hope well and better. And what really stuck out, Chris, was the mention that Jackson pulled out his camera or phone, I assume, and started taking video of his child laying on the floor. As a father, I can't fathom that at all. Like I would be. I mean, that child would be in my arms. That child would be on my lap. That was not even as a lawyer, as a person, as a father. That was really upsetting.
Well, it's even noted, and you've seen the police report for this particular incident, and I have it in front of me, and I've looked at it as well. It's even noted as strange by the investigator that he would, in the course of this, with Kai, the other parent here, take a video of the child on the driveway, then pan up to the window. And when later specifically asked about it, James Greg Onision says that there was a previous incident where somebody he was involved with was threatening suicide, and he videotaped that to prove that he didn't have any culpability, and that made him think about doing this. I don't get it. What is
that's a huge, Chris, that's a huge point. I mean, first of all, this is a 12, 13-foot fall.
Right.
I think it was a child 2.
It's 148 feet. So that's 148 feet. So that's,
so
148 inches. That's 12 feet. Right.
The fact that he had the thought process that he could be culpable, that he could be held liable, that he could be, that they were going to possibly question him about, I don't know what, about a criminal act, about his parenting, about lack of supervision. That would have never dawned on me. I mean, the police being at the house 19 times, we don't know why they were at the house yet. If they were out there for child, if it was CPS at the house all these times, or there were child issues, then of course it would make sense that he didn't want to be accused of neglect or intentional acts or whatever it could be. But the fact that that's where his mind went, that he had to protect himself and videotape the evidence, because that's what it is. You're videotaping for evidence. I think he gave an excuse when the cop was questioning him, that he said something like he did it for the police, for the doctor, so they could see how far the child fell.
Because the child might have hit some sort of a rock in the garden.
Again, very, very strange. Never seen that.
These police sheriff's deputy runs to the house range from CPS, Child Protective Services, wanting to check on the welfare of the children in the home because of a report that was phoned in because of the YouTube streaming James Onision was doing, to making a call that went to the school that was referred to the police in Child Protective Services, and no criminal charges, it's important to note, have come out of this thus far. But the criminal investigations, I mean, I just hours ago spoke to the deputy who heads up the Public Information Office and confirmed on the record. And I said to him, can I say it's on the record? He said, yes, absolutely. Multiple criminal investigations open in the county, and county sheriff's investigators are linked in with the FBI, which we know already because of our investigation is investigating a number of issues here, including alleged exploitation, enticement, and potential transmission of sexually explicit material of underage girls.
No wonder the police were not surprised to see you and I at his house a couple of weeks ago, because they've obviously, I mean, we did not have this information. All of this information came out because you knocked on that door. This would have all been, this all would have been a secret until something happens. Well,
I think that's interesting because there has been some criticism, not widespread, and mostly from James Jackson, Gregory Jackson Onision himself, in a complaint that we're going to talk about right now, that somehow that this was intrusive or threatening in any way. And just to reiterate, we did this by the book. It wasn't my first door knock, and it certainly, as an attorney, wasn't your first visit to a potential victim or somebody who may be involved in a legal matter. So the camera crews, the whole team stayed on the street, and I went up and knocked on the door, asked some questions through the door, announced who I was, heard Jackson on the phone. I didn't know at the time whether he was talking to a lawyer, whether he was talking to 911. Turns out 911. The deputies arrived, didn't seem surprised that we were there. We had a pleasant conversation. They referred us to the public information office, and off we went. And suddenly we have all this information, 19 calls in 1 year to one house.
Shocking.
You got to wonder, Mike, what the heck is going on in there?
Well, nothing about this guy makes sense to me. And, you've been reporting on him for months and months. Nothing adds up. The fact that he has now filed this against this anti-harassment.
Yeah, let's back up. So we find out that, to be clear, I haven't been served with this. So, technically, there's a hearing coming up, and I'm going to have you explain that to everybody watching tonight. But essentially what he's done, and correct me because you're the lawyer if I'm wrong, is pro se, meaning by himself. He got a pencil and paper out or used his computer and fashioned some sort of a complaint alleging that I was harassing him and that he wanted a personal protection order against me and another YouTube streamer known as Repsion Daniel Sulzbach.
Right. So yes, I've reviewed Daniel's. I've been talking with him, and yours. It's just real. I just want to. This is for the record. You have not been served,
right?
And serving a lawsuit, serving a PPO or an anti-harassment is part of the law. It's just part of a hoop that every single person in America has to go through. Before you have to show up at court, before you're summoned to do anything, for whether it be a subpoena. If somebody, there's a lot of people posting what you are eventually going to be served with online. So I have had a chance to look at some of the pages. I don't know if we have the whole thing. So you have not been technically served. In Tacoma, you have to have 5 days notice. You have to have the paper in your hands 5 days before a hearing. Mm-hmm. Your hearing is, I believe, according to what I have, set for this Friday at 1:30. Daniel's is the same day. And you're not going to be showing up because you haven't been served.
Is this case, Mike, based upon what abuse of the court system for somebody like this to claim that he was harassed? And we'll get into some of the things that he's done. I mean, he's done, on his own YouTube channel, he's harassed young women who were his followers, who he had a falling out with, women who he dated. He's gone to the areas where former collaborators lived and hung out with their exes who've been told to stay away from them. I mean, all kinds of really creepy, disturbing stuff. And then on top of it all, earlier on in this investigation, he takes video of me interviewing somebody else legitimately and splices in his own comments to make it look like I interviewed him, saying outrageous, offensive, and obnoxious things. If anybody's got a case for harassment, I would think it would be me.
Yeah, I think so too. It doesn't make any sense. It is an abuse of the court's resources. I'm hoping that they call them commissioners in Washington, not magistrates, not judges. They're commissioners. They're appointed. And actually, they're elected. And this person who eventually hears it, we don't know the name, who's going to be hearing yours or Daniel's case yet. That gets assigned, I think, on the day of. Hopefully, we'll see right through it. I mean, the video that you're referencing, yeah, that was one of the worst, most obnoxious false light videos I've ever seen, and it was upsetting. You take it with a grain of salt because you've been through this a million times.
I know who I'm dealing with.
But you know who you're dealing with. But the fact that he then turns around and files this against you and Daniel is absolutely outrageous. It's full of untruths, and he signed it under penalty of perjury, which there are 3 levels of perjury in Washington, the lowest being up to 364 days in jail, the highest being up to 10 years in jail, prison, for lying. And this petition, first of all, I'm gonna say that he asked the court and said it was an emergency, Chris. That he said it was an emergency. He didn't say this on Daniel's, but on yours, he's saying it's an emergency. He checked a box. An emergency exists, and I request that a temporary harassment restraining order granting relief be issued immediately without notice to you. Okay, that's not how America works, right? It's due process. You're allowed to present your case. But he alleged to the court, I think this is important, that there was such a huge emergency that the court should bypass your rights and sign this order and take away your First Amendment rights and take away other rights. And the judge who read the first petition denied that and said, nope, there's not enough evidence of that. We're setting it for hearing, which was the absolute right thing. But the fact that he has got to stand up under oath and explain to the judge or the lawyer who's there questioning him what emergency existed, I think that's an interesting first point.
Did he commit perjury by doing that?
Well, I can't think of an emergency. These things are, think about this. This is a harassment. There's stalking. There's abuse areas that you can file these for. I mean, these are for people in really deep trouble and in danger. And that's what this system's for, right? It's called these are orders for protection for harassment or stalking. In Michigan, they call those PPOs, personal protection orders. Every state has a little bit different. But so this judge had to waste time reading through these documents when they should have been helping somebody who really was in need, who might have had a real emergency, who really might have needed an ex parte order. The fact that he asked for one and wasted a judge's time, I think the judges are going to be pissed off, and it's one strike against him, and that's it. I mean, there's other things in here I want to go through with you, but that's the first one.
Yeah, right. So take me through it and take our audience through it. You've been going through the documents. You know this. I mean, from a lawyer's standpoint, I mean, it seems like this goes away pretty quickly. It's a harassment on the other side.
It says that a stalker showed up at the house, and then police sent them away. Okay. Number one, you're not a stalker. Number two, the police didn't send us away. And in fact, the police officer said to me, are you guys going to be sticking around any longer? Because if so, we'll just stay at the end of the street, make sure nothing, bad happens. And well, we're gonna stick around a little longer. Like, no problem. So those aren't true statements. He says that you're making numerous hate and harassment videos since August of 2019. I've seen most of your interviews, and I don't think anybody would call them hateful or harassing. I think you're just trying to get to the truth as a reporter. And, he puts that all in caps.
In caps. In the complaint.
Put it all in caps that way.
Have you seen that in a complaint before where somebody uses all caps? I mean, why not get construction paper and a crayon and get?
He's yelling. I mean, he's trying to, make his point. He's losing it. I mean, it's interesting. We haven't even thought about this, but all those videos he was making in 2019. Think about what was going on in his personal life. I mean, he had 19 cop calls, Child Protective Services. We don't know what other criminal stuff they are really investigating. I mean, it's a mess over there. And now, child falling out of the window with severe skull injuries and other injuries. The tables could be turned. His kids could have a petition. Hopefully Child Protective Services is all over it and making sure that these kids are safe, because that's first and foremost in my brain.
That brings up an interesting point, because a lot of people online, some streamers, some observers of this case went back and, based upon the police report at that time on September 12th, 2019, they went back and looked at some of the things that he was doing. And there is some evidence that while this poor child was falling out the window, suffering multiple skull fractures and hematomas that potentially could have been fatal, according to the police report. Onision is in there texting or typing or communicating with young female fans.
So that's fascinating. I haven't seen those videos. I mean, I don't even know what to say. That's shocking. I mean, if he's making videos and he's sending out emails while his kid's in the hospital, I mean, I don't know what kind of screw he has loose. And I know we've talked in the past about him, trying to come up with an insanity defense and with these videos and all this, but nothing about this guy makes sense to me. Nothing. I mean, shocking.
It's shocking. Well, I tell you, from a reporter standpoint, and I know from a lawyer standpoint, I'm glad we knocked on that door, because I don't know that we know all this stuff as we sit here tonight without doing that.
And now we're
trying to pat ourselves on the back, but I mean, the reality is that we know more now because we hoofed it out there and knocked on the door.
I think it lets everybody know what they're dealing with when they deal with him. The police don't look like they're done with their investigation. They know we're following it. Maybe it sounds like they're taking it seriously, but
I have every belief that they are. The FBI, for that matter.
Yeah, every interaction we've had with them has been stellar. I mean, they're on it, and 19 calls is just, I mean, that's one or two a month for the whole year. I mean, that's just crazy. And now this order, like, he's wasting his time. He had to go, file this. He's going to have to show up in court Friday. If he doesn't show up in court, it's automatically dismissed. He's asking that the court restrain you from any contact, restrain you from making attempts to follow him or his children. And he says, exclude the respondent from any place I may reside. He doesn't want you on his premises, entering the premises. Again, he talks about an emergency exists, and I request the temporary harassment restraining order, which is so rare. I mean, it's like that's saved for the most critical, dangerous situations. And he checked that box again under the penalty of, he says right here, it says, I certify under penalty of perjury under the laws of the state of Washington that the foregoing is true and correct. Signed, James Jackson, on January 9th, 2020.
So here's something interesting, Mike. If you go to a hearing like this as a lawyer, and you make the argument that we're not the harassers, I'm not the harasser, Repsion's not the harasser, Daniel Salzbach, but there's evidence that James Jackson, Gregory Jackson, Onision is harassing people online. Could you turn around as a lawyer and say, I want a court order banning him from going on the internet or his YouTube channel where he harasses so many people and conducts the same kind of behavior in real life that he's falsely alleging in this complaint?
It's an interesting idea because, well, first of all, people would have to sign it like he signed it. So you can't just do a general one, and you have to follow the procedure. So we would literally have to fill out the same paperwork. We'd have to serve him, and he'd show up, and he'd have to argue against it. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. And you could have multiple ones. But right now I'm here to protect you and to get this thing dismissed. That's what I care about. We absolutely could, if there are people out there who feel that he is harassing them, stalking them, they absolutely could fill out the same paperwork.
So this brings up an interesting question, Mike. You've talked to at least one of the victims and potentially more in this case. Could they file a claim like this?
Yes. Well, this is for imminent harm, imminent stalking, imminent harassment, not stuff that happened a year or 2 or 3 ago. So it would have to be timely, and it would be a waste of time if it wasn't. And if he was, if there's anybody watching or listening to this and he's actively doing things, then absolutely, this is the exact thing.
What should people do if they're and I get, messages and DMs all the time about people who have had some sort of dealing with Greg, James, Onision, Kai, the spouse. What should these people do if there are active harassment cases in their minds?
Well, they would go to the Pierce County District Court. You can probably do it online, 920 Tacoma Avenue South, and file a petition for order for protection of harassment. And they'd have to be willing to go to the courthouse. You can't, these are not things you can do. It's not a video courtroom.
Right.
You have to go and show up. So I've talked to victims in Florida and other states. I mean, these are, I don't right this second know who's in Tacoma or in that area, but it's not easy. Okay. I mean,
right.
It's, we have to do special things to fight this petition, because I'm in Michigan, you're in New York.
Right.
So it's not that easy. I mean, you still have to make an effort, spend money. I don't know how much actually this costs to file. But I'm sure there's a fee.
So fast forward, Mike, if you will, to Friday when this hearing is scheduled. And as you mentioned, I've not been served, so I don't need to go just yet. But theoretically, representatives of Epstein, Daniel Sulzbach will be there. You're going to be monitoring this hearing very closely. You're going to get the word out to people on your YouTube channel, Open Mic, on Friday, right after this happens. What should people look for?
So, well, first, one of two things are going to happen on Friday for you. We're either going to get an adjournment because you weren't served properly. Hopefully, if the judge will look at this, if Jackson doesn't show up, it's dismissed. So that one of those two things could happen. And if we can get an argument in front of the judge, and just show her maybe one, my vision is if we show her that one video that you referenced earlier in this podcast tonight, then I think the judge would see who this judge or commissioner, I should say, was dealing with.
Right.
And they would be offended, mortified, disgusted, case dismissed. Now, that's what I would do. Unfortunately, I can't be in Tacoma this Friday, but whoever we have arguing on our behalf, that's a play. I mean, they can go in with a laptop and try to show it to the judge and say, even though Chris wasn't served, Judge, you need to see who we're dealing with, this person. And that's a long shot because commissioners, judges, magistrates like to move things if they can.
Could you enter any of this into the argument, into evidence, the police reports,
everything
runs in the house?
Everything can. Everything comes in.
Everything is discoverable at this point, right? Because it's all relevant.
Well, yeah. So his
this could be another thing like the door knock that yields a lot more in this investigation.
So his veracity is 100% at stake. You didn't ask this, but I'll tell you anyway. The standard of proof for a case like this is called the preponderance of the evidence.
Right.
More likely than not standard. It's like if you see the scales of justice, you know what those are. They're sitting on every courtroom in America on the desk of the judge, and all the judge has to find is that the scales tipped ever so slightly in one of the two ways, and that's the person who wins, who shows a little bit more evidence to convince the judge. There's no doubt in my mind that the scales are going to be like, I'm not on the camera, like this in your favor, and it'll get dismissed pretty quickly because there are just so many untruths. He says that you're banging on the door and yelling on the door. We have it audio taped. We have it videotaped. You are very calm. I mean, there's 10 or 12 of those in here that, make my skin crawl because I was standing there, that you've been stalking them for over a half a year. And I'm not worried about this in the least bit. I just wanted this to happen as quickly and efficiently as possible. And then what I'll do is on Friday, when I get word, as I'm monitoring this on my YouTube channel, Mike Morse Law Firm, I'll drop it there, and people can, because I know your community is very interested in this stuff, and I will I'll put out details on Friday.
Good. We'll link everybody up. Mike Morse, as always, thank you very much for taking time out of your evening and joining us tonight from the suburbs of Detroit. Thanks for your help, your legal advice, your insight, and I will talk to you very soon.
Okay. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have another guest tonight, and probably no stranger to many of you who've been following this Onision saga for quite some time, YouTube streamer Stevie Wolfe. Stevie, thanks for coming in tonight and helping us out with this.
Thank you for letting me on.
Well, it's my pleasure. So, lots to talk about here, and there are some things deep in Onision's background that you have investigated and covered, and I want to get to that in a minute. But off the top, what do you make of this news tonight that we're breaking, that there are multiple open, active criminal investigations targeting James, Greg, Kai, and activities in that house in Washington State?
At this point, I can't be shocked, but I still am shocked. 19 times. 19 times. And we're talking about a guy who the entire 10 years that I've been doing this has claimed he's not involved in any nebulous or nefarious activities. 19 times nobody's ever shown up to my door.
Not my door.
Shocking. It's absolutely shocking to me, especially after the police report was leaked with what happened to his daughter. I mean, I can't even describe in words how I felt having to read that.
Well, it was tough because I initially got a short summary brief on the incident, and in a whole list of police runs that had happened, sheriff's runs that had happened in 2019, and I noted it, Saturday in a video that I put up on YouTube, and now just Monday we get this complete report talking about it, and the skull fracture, the hematoma, and it's
those are lifelong issues. I mean, don't just walk away from something like that.
Was okay, but in the police report, and I'm looking at it right now, it according to the doctor who was interviewed by the detective, it was a touch and go situation for this poor young child.
It was, and it will be for the rest of their life, because like I said, you don't just walk away from something like this. There's always the potential for permanent brain damage. It's heartbreaking. The entire time he's texting and tweeting out all these disgusting things that he's texting and tweeting out while his daughter is in the hospital with a subcranial hematoma.
Now, you have some familiarity with what he was doing, looking back and being embedded a little bit in this streaming community as you are, and it's very insightful to everybody, including myself. Paint a picture for me based upon what you've been able to find out through your sources. We know investigatively what the sheriff's department, the investigators say. Greg in the report says, well, he was in the garage, he was working, he was doing some stuff. He works out at home from the computer. It's fascinating to read this. And he hears something outside, and he runs out, and it's the daughter who's fallen out of the window. But and you've confirmed and you've seen what he was actually doing and texting and what was happening while this poor child was injured.
Right after this happened, he went almost immediately to Twitter, and I don't want to be loose on your program, but he was making gross sex tweets. Basically, he was trying to entice, as far as anybody can tell, a lot of his female audience into either being involved erotically with him. I don't know how else to put it. He was just tweeting out some of the most disgusting, depraved things you could tweet out.
In the immediate aftermath of his daughter,
right after she was admitted to the hospital. He goes right to Twitter. He gets right on his phone. He starts putting these disgusting things out there. And if you guys want afterward, I can send some of these your way that were archived. They're disgusting. I don't know if you want them shared on your show. The fact that you would do that right after your daughter falls headfirst on your cement driveway. We've crossed the line from this being just somebody who's an eccentric individual on the internet into a level of depravity that I was not prepared, even after the years I've been doing this, for it to enter into. And it makes me almost uncomfortable, reading into some of the things that he's done now, as opposed to how it was when I started, which was just this goofball on YouTube that was making all these insane statements and getting in all these insane dramas. Now this is a level of depravity and criminality that makes me sick to my stomach.
Multiple open criminal investigations confirmed on the record by the Pierce County, Washington Sheriff's Department.
Exactly. And he's been saying the entire time that the police weren't involved, that they sided with him, whatever that means. Police are objective in their investigations. They go by the evidence they're provided. They don't take sides with people in that sense that he's referring to it particular.
You started following him some 10 years ago? Reporting on this? What drew your attention to Onision, Greg, James, whatever his name is today?
Well, that's going way back. I started following him initially after he started a lot of controversy in different commentary communities that existed at the time because he was a militant vegetarian. So he would put out his views about vegetarianism and trying to antagonize people that didn't like how he's putting it out there, in the sense that how PETA does it, where they try to antagonize people into changing their dietary choices by putting it out there in an edgy way and trying to engage the conversation in maybe a not so positive or constructive way. And by following that controversy, I discovered his Onision Speaks channel, and he would stand up on his videos and pretend he's a guru know-it-all. I knew there was a problem there, referencing people from back in the 90s that would do the same thing with self-help tapes, people that were self-proclaimed know-it-alls like Tony Robbins and such, for example. You always have to take the things people like this say with a grain of salt. And seeing the sway that he had over his audience, it concerned me then just as much as it concerns me now, that even though his audience has completely dwindled into almost nothing, there's still that level of control.
But he still has a lot of people following him, paying him.
Not as many anymore. But there are still a loyal core following of people that he mostly cultivates on Discord, which is, it's like Skype, but you can have groups of people in there. So,
and how did this guy become so popular?
Collaboration, mostly.
I don't want to pretend like I'm in this demographic.
No, you're not. You're definitely not. What it was collaboration in the beginning. So, I mean, his content is not particularly engaging, but what it really at its core was the internet was exposed to YouTube at a time where content like that was going to be big because it was something new. So he would collaborate with people like Shane Dawson, others of that ilk. And by being featured in those videos and sharing his own around, it got him a much bigger and bigger audience, as people who were fans of people like that got to see him more often. They're like, oh, who's this guy? So then when Daniel Tosh on his Tosh.0 show features the banana song video on his show, it gets transcended from just the internet to then, television, and then the views just explode from there. That's how the popularity for him grew and grew and grew. And with his multitudes of channels, different types of content, there were different things for people to be attracted to. So that's where it all began for him to become hugely popular online. Now, he was not always that way before YouTube. He was a very obscure underground internet figure. And I found that out by searching what his website was like prior to him being on YouTube, because I was curious, well, where did this all really begin for this guy?
Got it. And so after looking at him for so long, is he running a cult in some ways?
In a way. I would say that it's a cult of personality, as bourgeois that term might be to use. He has very many cult leader-like proclivities. He has the eccentric personality you would find definitely in a cult leader. He has the loyal following, even if it's dwindled to the size that it is now. There are still people that are very indoctrinated by the idea he's done nothing wrong here, even despite the evidence that's presented to everybody. When I found his old website, he was trying to shill a self-created religion he called Seseska, which was nothing more than a bunch of word vomit. And I don't know whether
religion called Seseska.
It was a bunch of word vomit he put out on the internet that he thought made a whole lot of sense. He would put on his website at the time that he believed in this own religion of his 100%. whatever that means. I didn't know what to make of it. When I made a video putting it out there, he threatened to sue me in the same manner that he's doing what he's doing now with you, which I wasn't afraid of, because knowing that if it's for defamation, which he was trying to imply it was, he'd have to disprove everything I said was true, which if you find that on a website where the URL is your opponent's entire name, that's going to be a little difficult.
So all these young women start following him, and he crops some of them out of the herd, if you will, and develops an obsession, if you follow this, and then in some cases relationships. He seems to pick those who are in some way vulnerable, and this isn't the victims, because they are victims, and I've interviewed many of them on this show. But there seems to be a lot of commonality there in terms of what he tries to get them to do. There is head shaving, there is talk of tattoos. He has them sign contracts.
Defeminization, a lot of degradation. Yes. He seems to pick women that are from either broken family households. And I'm not putting the women
No. We're not blaming the victim here, but
I'm just saying as example, they come from a broken background, emotional issues. It seems to be his proclivity to do this. He wants to find somebody who has something that's misaligned or broken in their background and give them the impression that, well, if you get with me, I can fix all your problems. I've got all this money. I'm this big entertainer on the internet. That's where he gets his wedge in. That's what he used to use for years to entice these girls into their house, because they were young, they were from a damaged background, or they had some other thing going on for them that would have dissuaded their better judgment.
Many of the victims have told me, and I know you're aware of this, that the reason they started watching him was because he of somewhat of a self-helpish.
Yeah, that was his speech channel.
Don't kill yourself or don't consider suicide. Yeah. Better than that.
That's what he would do on his speech channel. He would make videos talking about these subjects over and over again. He would just make this long 10-minute piece about how he feels about suicide or this and that. And it's like, okay, at face value, that's nice. You're not a psychologist. You're not a therapist. You're not really qualified to actually speak about this. But when you're young and you're not really thinking critically, or you don't know any better, you're going to intake that and you go, wow, this guy really gets me. He's down on my level. It was in my opinion, it was a ploy that he knew he was well aware of doing. He wanted to appeal to a particular demographic and exploit what was going on for them because he knew it would bring him the views, and by the views, he would get money.
Do you think he started this whole show on YouTube and other places to groom, entice, target young women, or do you think that's who ended up being his audience and he figured out a way to exploit it along the line?
That is actually a good question, because I'm not entirely sure. I mean, there's evidence to suggest that I found over the years that he's always been this way, that he's always wanted to just be an exploitionist for people's emotions, play with them and manipulate them that way. And he's admitted such in certain videos regarding his vegetarianism, where he admits he's being manipulative in his arguments there to try to get the response that he wants out of other people. But when it comes to relationships, it could have transmogrified out of his level of fame. He could have looked at how popular he'd gotten. He could have said to himself, well, you know what? This is just what I'm going to do now because I'm too big and I've got too much money for people to really do anything about it. We've seen that before with people like Austin Jones and such. They thought they were above the law, and well, look at how well it turned out for him.
But it's interesting, Stevie, because virtually all the victims say the same thing. He knew the buttons to push. He knew the topics that would gain loyalty and trust with a vulnerable female audience in their adolescence and early teens.
He studied his demographic. He'd been doing it long enough over the years. And what was really surprising to me, too, is in my earlier days doing the videos that I was doing, is how studied he was about his demographic, how learned he was, because he knew exactly, and you're right, and whoever told you that, they were exactly right, too, the right buttons to push. Because that's exactly the kind of content you would want to have done at the time to appeal to that particular audience, if that's what you were going for.
So You've been digging around in his past further back than I've had the opportunity to dig. So just take me back. I mean, this kind of activity, is it rooted in his high school, junior high school days? Have you been able to, I mean, can you give me any insight as, where did this all start?
It seems to have started early on in middle school for him. He has a website version of his Onision.com that's accessible through the Wayback Machine, which is a function of archive.org. So if you were to type Onision.com in this, you can look at different screenshots and archives of the website going as far back as 2004. He was willing to detail himself every single one of his ex-girlfriends going back to like second grade, but let's be honest, who has a girlfriend in second grade? Okay, you don't have that kind of connections with people. By that, I was able to surmise that there has been an element of predation ever since his early life due to the fact that he has this disconnection between what's an acceptable norm in a relationship and what is unacceptable. He has himself actually doxed himself multiple times by posting things from his elementary school days and middle school days on his Twitter. Why he did this, I don't know. And I wish I could have caught the screenshot when I did. But he was having required parent conferences, RPCs, about these kind of behaviors going as far back as about sixth grade. When you deal with an individual that does these things as an adult, you have to be aware that there's possibly a proclivity for them to do so early on in their life. And with him, there existed such.
So he goes through school and ultimately ends up in the Air Force. Now, when he was saber rattling with me early on in the investigation, he made it sound like I would never do anything like this. I was a military police officer in the Air Force.
Yeah, he was security forces, which, yes, was military police, yes.
Take me back to his Air Force days. What do you know about that? I mean, I've seen a document or two about his discharge, which makes it look not like it was under the best of circumstances, but take me through that.
His Air Force days where he signed up for the Air Force, he got stationed over in South Korea, and nearly right off the bat, he immediately wanted out. His discharge was under the circumstances of having a mental breakdown, not much different than along the lines of the videos we've seen come out of him, that he was trying to convince people were real. Thankfully, nobody bought it. In his words, he put his service pistol to his head. He was put in the brig and then medical lockdown for a while. And he was trying everything he could to get out by that. He was basically just trying to come off as suicidal and unstable just to get out of the military, which always made me wonder, why did you bother signing up? So he made a couple of websites as well, detailing his time in there. Tried to get into SEER training, which is survival evasion. Don't quote me 100% on that, because
no, I know what you're talking about, though. It's
okay. SEER training. It's
of being a tough guy, be able to survive.
Yeah, it's like evasion and rescue training, basically, right. Special forces training. He was in that for a while. He dropped out because of one of the sections of the training where they make you kill a rabbit. It's like a survivalist part of it. If you're in the elements out there, you've got to do what you can to survive. He became a conscientious objector, and he did everything he could to get out after getting in.
Some career in the Air Force, huh?
Yeah, not really much of a career. He was in there for 3 years, and that's what he did.
Take me through his first marriage to the extent you can to Sky. There's a lot there.
His first marriage was what I started doing videos on him about. So that was what was going on at the time. And we don't really know too much about what was going on behind closed doors, as much as we do with Shiloh, as much as we do now with Kai. What we do know is that he up and wanted to divorce her for Shiloh out of absolutely nowhere. He was seeing her on the forums behind her back. He was willing to break up the marriage almost entirely for her. So he provides her with divorce papers right off the bat, and the fallout from it, that's really what hit home for me. He was willing to use the size of his entire YouTube audience to basically bully her offline when she tried to separate away and make a video channel for content of her own. He does this video real patronizing, like, hey guys, this guy's got a new channel, you should go check it out, knowing full well what his audience was going to do. Full well what they were going to do. And lo and behold, a whole bunch of hatred goes their way, and they end up having to come off YouTube, and that's where they've essentially been for the last several years, and I don't blame them. This is a proclivity he has had for many, many years.
Well, then he goes on to do this with Shiloh.
He does. He goes on to do it with all the women.
Yeah,
he does it with every single one of them.
Consent, where she is on tour.
Mm-hmm.
They have a relationship. She gets involved with him, and in the videos of the epileptic seizure, the head shaving, it's this poor girl.
It's disgusting.
Prison, and the harassment on his part continued on and off for a long time, and then he ends up with his current spouse, Kai. What do you think and there are other, obviously, relationships along the way, Sarah and the ones we know about, the ones the victims we've talked to on this show, and you're well aware of. What do you think the real relationship is between James, Greg, Onision, and Kai?
I'm so glad you asked me that question. I was hoping you would at some point. I think it's a relationship out of fear of who's going to rat on who first, because frankly, I think the only thing at the end of the day that really attracted them to one another is that they feel they have both the same illness. They know what they are, because we know that Kai helped him find these underage girls. And we know that he never said no to any of it. I think what really attracts them together and keeps them together at this point is now that we know we're in a relationship together, it was based on this need to be with people that understood one another on that sick basis. If we're in interrogation and we're talking to the cops, who's going to rat first? I think that's the only thing that's keeping them together at this point, personally, because that's what I feel really attracted, because the girl was willing to go head over heels for this guy. And there was evidence to suggest she was as young as 15 years old when she started talking to him, meaning she was still in high school on different social media sites, not major ones like Facebook. There were others that they were communicating on as well. When she was as young as 15 years old. The fact you got to get a lawyer to make sure that your relationship is actually legal, marrying them is legal. I personally never bought that. Where are you going to find a lawyer that's going to facilitate that for you? But I think that's really what drew them together at the end of the day.
Right. He's known for faking these contracts and documents.
Oh, yeah. They're not legally binding. And he scared a lot of these women about them, making them think that they were.
It brings up an interesting point, because one of the reasons why we decided to go out to Washington State to see if we could, get an interview or have a spontaneous interaction with him was because he was making all these claims and making videos that he was streaming that put him in a rental property, in a hotel room. He was flashing documents claiming they were divorce papers, saying that he lost his home, that Kai was divorcing him, all this to gin up sympathy, apparently, to get this audience going. Woe is me, a victim. Chris Hansen's coming after me. I'm being victimized by this. Oh, everybody else is wrong. Everybody else is out to get me because I wouldn't continue the relationship. I mean, even in the 911 call, as I'm standing on the front porch of his home, he's telling the operator some cockamamie story about a 19-year-old who gave him negative energy and had to get her out of life. And that's why that person talked to me and said some mean things. Now, I was saying mean things about him because of these lies from this 18 or 19.
The 19-year-old that was 14. It's the 19-year-old that was 14 when he first started talking to her with Kai. I find it funny that he changed that aspect of the story. Why? Because the cops wouldn't like to hear the real thing.
Why even go there is my point. I mean, if I'm standing on your front porch and you don't want to talk to me,
exactly,
and you call the police, then just shut up and don't say it. What compels him to make up that story and try to spin that narrative? I mean, the operator didn't care.
He has to be a professional victim in every single scenario so he can figure out a way to weasel his way on top, like most predators of his ilk do. They always have to be the victim at the end of the day. And I'm sure that in the years that you've been doing this, you've seen that many, many times. You've watched the interrogation videos that come out after the cops talk to these guys. I mean, some of them are kind of amusing because you'll see the cop listen to about 3 hours worth. He's slumped in his chair because he's sick and tired of listening to the just cavalcade of excuses after excuses of victimization. It's like, no, the victims at the end of the day are the women that you victimized through your emotional abuse, through your sexual harassment and sexual abuse, not yourself. If Chris Hansen's knocking on your door, there's a reason. With the 911 operator, I'm actually surprised they didn't say, Chris Hansen's at your door. Well, what did you do?
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
Do you think Kai is a predator? And if so, where does Kai rank in relation to Onision's predatory behavior?
I think they're a predator in no short order. I think, excuse me?
As a team?
As a team, yes, I think they are, because they're complicit with all this, and there's no way that they can deny their complicity. You can't not know what you're doing when you're engaging in sexually explicit communication with somebody who's as young as 14 or 15 years old or 16 years old. You know that you're enticing them, and you know that you're using, and I'm not going to get into this huge thing here, but you know that you're using your femininity, you're being a woman to sexually appease somebody that is, bisexual in their orientation in order to get what you want. There's so much cognizant. You're so cognizant of what you're doing at that point, you can't not know what you're doing. So I believe, yes, they're a predator.
Was Kai procuring for Onision, James, Greg?
I feel they were. I feel that after a while, they got sick and tired of the fact that James was just cheating on her. Let's face it, that's what he was doing. He was not really, after a while, including her in a lot of these relationships. What happened with Billy, she ended up leaving the house for a time over because she was sick and tired of him out in the open, just wanting to leave Kai for Billy. She was sick and tired of it. So at the end of the day, I think the procurement became like a Band-Aid.
Right. Sorry. No. It's an important point. Do you think Kai, in some ways, liked having another person in the house because it took?
I think so, in a way. And polyamorous relationships in general, it seems to be, something that people do. They feel they need to take the weight off the stress of the relationship in one way or another sometimes. But in this case, I mean, these are no normal relationships. We're talking about people that are fresh out of high school that don't know what they're really getting into, in some cases.
Did you ever think, when you started looking into this and commenting on it and researching it and in a way investigating it, that it would turn into this some 10 years later?
I was hoping it wouldn't. I wanted this to just stay some weird eccentric person on the internet, but it's the internet. It never just stays that way. I never wanted to ever learn about any of the things that we now know. Like I said, just wanted it to be some weirdo that was an eccentric person online. You could just throw brainless response video content to, not really think about too hard. But in seeing what's happened to every one of these women and seeing what's happened to that kid, my God, that poor kid. That's the part that hits so home for me.
It's my heart as a parent. I mean,
yeah.
And countless stories over the years.
That's not the only time something like that's happened in his household. Right. It's now that it's moved up to children. It was with animals originally. He put a turtle in a plastic bin in his backyard at his old house, which had a big open backyard. Why he did this, we'll never know. His excuse was, well, I wanted it to be outside its terrarium and I didn't want my dogs to bug it. Of course, you put it in a plastic clear bin, the sun hits it, 30 minutes later, goodbye turtle. He makes a big bunch of excuses about why he does this.
Right.
It's a living thing.
He's brought up the treatment of animals in that home.
No, it's terrible. He doesn't take care of his pets. He wants to be a vegetarian animal activist, and he doesn't take care of his pets. He doesn't walk his dogs. He doesn't do anything for them. He buys animals and then rehomes them when he gets sick and tired of their novelty, which is terrible because a lot of the times when the animals can't get rehomed, well, where do you think they go? They go to a shelter, and if they can't be rehomed there, they're probably put down. It's terrible. These are living things that feel, and he doesn't give a crap about them at all. Sorry.
Yeah. It brings up an interesting point. He's been a public figure for so long and a staple on YouTube. This is a guy who at one point had 2 homes, 2 Teslas, I mean, he was throwing money around left and right on, flying this girl out and that girl out and making videos and editing equipment and video cameras and all kinds of things. What kind of money do you suppose he made in his peak years?
Well, this is my estimation. Okay. It's not anything that I would quote, but I would say probably about $20-30 million. They were throwing
$30 million?
Yeah. The reason being is they would throw money at YouTubers. They would throw money at them back in the early days of the partnership program. So every $10,000 or 10,000 views, you get like $1,000. You have a video that has 76 million views. You got to think about the residuals on that. Now, when you have a ton of videos over 5 or 6 different channels,
Stevie, let me get this clear, and I'll let you go on. I promise. YouTube was throwing money at him, or was this
YouTube was the revenue? Yeah, because it was the partnership program on YouTube back in the day. So at bare bones, it was YouTube through the Google ad revenue program. So they would generate a stream of ad revenue between sponsors and advertisers. So therefore, anybody could get their videos monetized back then. It was a lot different than it was now. In fact, some of the contracts that they would write up for people back then were so ridiculous. It was unbelievable. A lot of people have forgotten about this because they're more worried about how they adpocalypse and everything's happened, especially with Susan Wojcicki running it the way that she does now. It's a completely different landscape to the Wild West it was back then. So I can understand when people would think that's an absolutely ridiculous amount of money, but you got to think about how much money does a person have to have 2 $700,000 houses, 2 $110,000 Teslas. They're blowing money on flying girls out left and right. He's buying thousands of dollars of video equipment, editing equipment like software, video equipment like cameras. He's got in the background of one of his videos a $10,000 Sony HDV that I don't think he's ever used. It's one of those big shoulder cameras you've probably seen on shoots. Yeah, those are like $10,000, $11,000. It's like he just looks at a page in B&H and says, I want everything in here. And that's what he buys.
So
it's ridiculous.
Know what I'm going here with this, Stevie? Is that why YouTube allows him to stay on?
Perhaps.
And Susan Wojcicki won't come on this show and talk to me about the reasoning?
Perhaps he was one of the big money makers in the beginning, and a lot of people wouldn't like to say that about it now because he's fallen from grace so far, but he really was, as much as people don't like hearing that. And I think that they really protect some of the early money makers because they're worried about what it would make their brand appear like that far down the line. I also think that when it comes to Susan Wojcicki not coming on your show and a lot of what's going on with these sanctionings, I mean, you got to think about it like what it's being on a television. It's on TV. What they really care about is they care about the ratings. They care about what's going to appeal to the advertisers. So they demonetize people more or less, not based on morals or ethics, but what is going to keep pulling in the money? Okay, what can we get away with? The best that we can get away with it. I think that's why they moved into paid content too on YouTube.
We had a channel demonetized for using certain words.
Yeah,
what we were doing is, exposing, the P word that apparently we're not allowed to say for some reason.
Yeah.
Yet Onision can do a video and drop the towel in the shower and expose his genitalia. That's fine, apparently, with YouTube.
Oh, that's not lost on me.
Explain that to me.
Well, that's not lost on me. Some of my content, my video responses to them are just, I'm not going to say anything that I'll say in those videos here on your show for the sake of that, but I'll say that I've not been demonetized for doing what I've been doing. And it kind of blows my mind that I haven't, because I'm trying to figure out where is the delineation between the kinds of content. Here you have somebody that's exploiting every amount of your TOS possible, and they don't get demonetized. Here's somebody else that's just a vulgar loudmouth because that's the way they do content. But here's somebody else who is established in, in what it is that you've been in for nearly 40 years now, that is trying to get some headway in an investigation done. They're being professional. They're doing they're making all the right moves that they need to make. And they just sanction you based on a word arbitrarily. It doesn't make any sense. And the fact that they can't justify why they do this, they don't want to actually come out and say, okay, well, this is why we do it, face to face, without setting up an interview that's on their grounds and on their terms. I mean, that's nebulous to me. And this par for the course with Google and these big tech companies. So.
Initially, Susan Wojcicki herself responded to my email, as well as somebody from their media relations department, and there was talk about cooperation and talking about what YouTube is doing.
Yeah, there was. I remember.
And viewers from predatory behavior. Now that all went away, and I got kind of a smart aleck remark from the media relations person saying, "Well, we just don't comment on individual streamers." Well. Okay, If you're not going to comment, well, that's fine, because I'll just go right over to the Pierce County Sheriff's Department. They're commenting on it.
Yeah.
And what goes on there and in relation to the streams. I mean, so, is YouTube above law enforcement? And
I don't think they feel that they're above law enforcement. I just think that they're too brand proud to actually think they need to sink down to the level of responding to people. And you're lucky that you got an actual person and not a bot, because when we deal with copyright claims, they don't even care.
Because, I had a source to get the right email. I mean, if you just go what's on the, help.
You get a robot basically replying back to you. Yeah.
If it's an emergency, we'll get back to you, a week from Tuesday. So here's something else. And I have 100 questions for you, Stevie, and I'm just going to be upfront that we're not going to get them all tonight.
Yeah, that's fine.
I promise that you'll come back on this show at some point in the very near future as this develops, because what you're saying here is fascinating, and you know what you're talking about. And I appreciate all the hard work you put into this. I appreciate you giving me this platform. You've had, and this is the last thing I want to get into, and I'll let you get on with your evening tonight, but you've had actual interaction with Onision online. If you want to call it that, yeah. I debated him a couple of times. Anybody who doesn't know what happened here, we talked about it yesterday in the pre-interview. Tell me how this came about, what happened, and take me through it. All right, so about in 2013, Greg was really getting a lot of heat from the aftermath of the Shiloh thing and everything else that basically had boiled up to then. And he was sick and tired of actually having to make video after video after video of excuse explaining his side of the story. So he decided that he would debate people like myself and others that were making videos about him to try and prove us wrong, which turned out to be an absolute disaster for him because it didn't help his credibility. And it wasn't like a forum where you've properly set everything up here. Right. He was sitting in his garage next to a bunch of laundry machines when I talked to him. The first one where I had any real interaction with him, I actually rudely crashed the stream. I didn't even know that I was doing it, actually, because he'd left my mic open. He was talking to another person. I'm not going to mention their name only because I don't know if they actually want to be mentioned. So but they were talking to them, and he had left their mic open and his speakers up. So they're just feeding back. I tell him to knock it off. So there that goes. And eventually we get to talking. Now, originally what was going to happen is he was going to be debating Repsion that particular night. But Repsion was not available to do so. He had a crash with his internet or something. He emails me out of the blue. And he says, if you have any integrity, you want to do this, like, now's your time. Like, he's putting me on the spot. I'm like, yeah, I only wanted to be doing this for a few years now. So I go in there, and it's just a circus. Talking to him is like talking to a brick wall. You don't really have a conversation with this guy because he's so convinced that he's right. He doesn't know how to actually understand that he's not. So trying to get any point across to him is just you're getting questions answered with more questions. The second time I did this, I crashed a YouNow stream of his just because I had nothing better to do. And that was the one that got shared around recently. He wanted to get Repsion again in a debate, and he was not willing to do so. He was out doing something with his girlfriend. I said, well, I'm not doing anything this afternoon. Why not? What's the worst that could happen? But again, it's like talking to a person that's just a wall. There's no cognition of, you understand that the criticism you're faced with is for a legitimate reason. Like, this is not some game. It didn't even occur to him that this was a problem. And the Amazing Atheist on YouTube, by the way, said the same thing. He was approached by the production staff of the Steve Wilkos show. They wanted to get both of them on for a conversation. I don't know if you've reached out to him about that, if you'll commentate on it or not. That's up to you. But he said essentially the same thing. It didn't occur to him that this wasn't a game. It's like everything that happens with Onision in regards to this is like one big show. Virtual reality.
Yeah, he's not living in reality. It's like, yes, you're caught in legal stuff now. You're facing going to jail for a significant portion of your life now. Like, this is not a joke. But when he talked to me, he's just like, oh, it's just a big game. Okay, yeah, No, I'm not pretending to be mad with the things that you've done to people. I'm not going to mention anything about them here because they don't want me to, but one of which I know. It's like the things you've done to them and their family. It's like, this is not a joke, dude. Sorry.
You ever talk to him one-on-one on a phone conversation or email back and forth?
Briefly before we did the stream that we did the debate on, and it was very strange. I mean, again, it was like talking to somebody that didn't know that this is real life. You know, it's just like, oh, let me get everything set up. Okay, this is going to be really good. It's going to be really good. It's like, it's not going to be really good. I'm like mad with you for legitimate reasons. This isn't a circus to me. This is 10 years of my life. You think I would really spend that much time if this was a big joke?
Is he making any money today?
He could be through whatever methods you can use to get donations. I know that he can circumvent Patreon only because YouTube has a subscription feature. I think you know about like how that works possibly. Yeah, it's like a join feature. You pay like a $12, whatever the limit you can set a month, and you can get. So he's circumventing it that way. I could be getting direct donations from people. As far as being monetized on YouTube, there are a couple of channels he's still probably monetized on. So
who's going to donate to Onision, given everything we know and everything we've reported, everything you've reported, other people as well, what the victims have said, what the law enforcement is doing, FBI and local law enforcement?
Somebody severely in denial.
I mean, how does that even work? I mean, who's going to give Onision money? I mean, people are. Apparently, he's, surviving.
He found a niche. I don't know how he managed to do it, but he found a niche. I mean, in his Discord, there are people that are as young as 13 years old. There are people that are a little older than me, about 36 years old, so be like 4 or 5 years older than me, that are throwing money in support of this guy. If you ever listen to some of the leaks that come from his Discord, they just give him, it's just absolutely unfiltered support. Like, oh, these people are just making all this up. But it's like, who would fabricate?
Yeah, but here's the guy,
Stevie,
let me just make this one point. We're following him around trying to do the interview in Seattle and Tacoma area. And he puts out this video, bizarre, rambling video from a hotel room. And we know the hotel room because we saw in the video, the picture of the landscape outside and the pillows and the art. We knew exactly where he was.
Those were not cheap, by the way. Those were like $200 a night.
No, I know. I stayed in the same hotel. I mean, we were looking for him. Stayed, and Mike Morse and I and the crew stayed in that same hotel where he was staying in Tacoma, Washington. And I had the same pillow in my room as we saw in the video in Onision stream. But anyway, as creepy as that sounds, we were trying to do an interview with him, and that's what ultimately led us to his house. But the point I was making is that this stream he did, he goes into this long, rambling, whiny, cry diatribe about how when he was a kid, a dog sneaked up from behind and had sex with him. And it just, who says that and who wants to hear it?
Somebody that's just trying to screw with you. Somebody that's just making a big spectacle about the entire thing because they don't want to have to take it seriously. It's just a distraction. It's what he's done for years. The only reason he does content like that is to distract from the severity of it, thinking it actually works, but it doesn't. At least in his mind, it does. But
what should happen to Greg and Kai, James, Greg, Onision, and Kai?
I think that they need prosecution. I think they need to go to jail. I think that they need to be punished for the things that they've done. And I think that it doesn't matter how people emotionally feel, about like if they've been emotionally involved with Greg or Kai, that doesn't enter into it. It's the fact that these people exploited you. These people took advantage of you. These people used their presence on the internet to make you just a laughing stock of the internet. And I think that they need to be punished for the things that they've done, because normal people do not think, I want to get into a relationship with a vulnerable 16-year-old or vulnerable person in any regard and just exploit them until I've had my fill of them. It's disgusting.
All right, Stevie, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It was really, really important stuff and very enlightening. Anything else you want folks out there to know before we good night you?
Not really. I mean, I just want to thank you for allowing me to have this platform. It's been years in the making this. So if you want me on again, I'm more than happy to join you. Anything else?
That will happen, my friend. You're a good man, and thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it very much. You have a good night, and thanks for all the insight, all the hard work over the years. Stevie Wolfe, everyone, thank you very much. As we wrap up tonight, a couple final thoughts. I think significant is that, again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, and with Mike Morse and with Stevie Wolfe there, that the Pierce County Sheriff's Department now confirming on the record multiple criminal investigations. we'll be following that very closely, and I'll be keeping in touch with everybody out there and at the federal government level. I want to also say that you have my absolute word that I am committed to see this investigation through. We will stick with it until justice is served. It is not lost on me that that is exactly what happened and what had to happen in many other cases like this, be it Harvey Weinstein, who's on trial now here in New York. Opening arguments began today. Jeffrey Epstein, who died in his prison cell here in New York. It was the reporting that chipped away and got information from the victims and helped keep this awareness going. And, look, law enforcement's doing its job. There's all kinds of talk about the FBI and what the FBI is doing. Look, this stuff takes time. I've been down this road a lot with different law enforcement agencies. It's not like Chris Hansen can call the FBI and suddenly they take somebody away in cuffs. That's not how it works. So, there's going to be some patience required here, but I can promise you that things are happening behind the scenes and more publicly. So that's it from here. And once again, thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. We will be back next week. As Mike Morse mentioned, Friday on Open Mic with Mike Morse, he'll have an update on the hearing, such as it is in Washington State. I'll also have some information as it happens. And, if this keeps going the way it has, we'll be breaking in with a number of new pieces of information involved here. And also, I want to tell you that, we're putting together a series that we're going to have here on Have a Seat with Chris Hansen and Open Mic with Mike Morse, talking about and showing what we did and the behind the scenes of that trip out to Washington State. And that's in editing right now. And we're going to piece that together with everything that came out of it. And it's a fascinating process, everything that we had to do behind the scenes to track this down. So thank you very much. Have a pleasant, peaceful evening, and I will see you very soon, either here or on the TV. Thanks again for joining.